Yeah, I was trying to think of like chairs around here and stuff.
It will be recorded.
Yeah.
Already hit record.
Right. That's when we get started.
You must, what do you know? Council members. 21 city council members.
Fairly common, you know, and that's part of their job.
We're excited about.
Off we go. All right. All right, so, I'm going to start with, some governance manual stuff, federal license and law. What do you want to do next? All right, so we get to, oh. Hey Kurt, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. All right, so, we get to start off with the most exciting part, and that's the governance manual review. We're going to start with council liaison positions, and we're going to just talk a little bit about that. So you all were appointed your liaison positions at January 13th, and governance manual has a provision in there that that you guys could report on your liaison positions. So this is something that we've talked about historically, about adding it to monthly reports, and it's just something that we haven't done. But if you would like, we can add that. We can just put council reports on those monthly first of the month meetings. That would give you guys the opportunity to share what you have learned in your liaison positions, or if you went to any training or any, like the Capitol, at the official day at the Capitol or the legislative meeting, or any of those things, and then that gives you guys a venue being able to share what you've learned. So are you guys all good with adding that to the agenda?
Yeah, I think that's an important piece, and, you know, it may be that we don't have a report for any of us that particular meeting, but we attend some really interesting things. And, so I think as we get more involved in these liaisons and have more, as Mike was mentioning yesterday, representation in presence and community, report that out. Beneficial to all of us. So I think it could be a standing item on our agenda.
I think so too. I think we should put a time limit on it though. I think you can hear this from me all day about time limits on a meeting and being efficient. But I think that, yeah, it's a great idea. I think we should just say, we just don't want to belabor anything. Overall, I will. But make it a set, 5 minutes. So it can be urban renewal, and we can say, hey, Colby, do you want to tell us what's going on? For Mike, do you want to talk about what's going on? Be either of us, or we can chime in, but we just say, hey, it's gonna be 5 minutes on that.
Yeah, or even less.
We could say pass or whatever.
It could also be structured like the other monthly reports, where they're in the packet and say, so, okay, Lyle submitted a report on this, do we have any questions? instead of having that person.
What do you guys think about written from us versus having any kind of dialogue? What do you think, Bob?
I think, my opinion on that is verbal would be better. 2 reasons. One, it's good to hear it. We, as a council, do a little better with that. And I think there's going to be a challenge to getting people to actually write down something. So another burden, you're adding on more duties as you and your private lives are pretty busy. So that would be the downside, but I'm willing to do whatever, personally, as a member of council, whatever this group thinks would be helpful. And Bessie Jo is correct. The whole purpose of a liaison is bring back information and share.
I like what you're saying, Julie. Julie. So where do I see Julie?
That's my Google name.
Oh, so yeah, good idea. I guess there is something to be said for, like you said, Bob, maybe a little bit of engagement. Or I guess maybe I did that too. There's something to be said. Lyle's enthusiastic about something that Lyle's just forward. So say with urban renewal with Colby Hydro Farm, we're like excited about moving forward with something in the district and we want to share that. Like the waterway management plan. There is something about bringing that enthusiasm. What are you going on?
Yes, that's my style. You might hear my thoughts on that.
What's your take on it, Colby?
I think that it'd be good to at least reserve some space during the reports for it. I guess overall with that section, always kind of big on this one, but when the way we do it now is, ask if council has any questions. Feel like we're kind of, if we don't have any questions for staff, but maybe staff has something in those reports that they would like to highlight. I don't think anyone would necessarily have to highlight anything if they don't want to, but if we're going to have the approach of like, yeah, Mike, what you want to report on MRA, or if anyone feels like they want to highlight something in their report, any extra information that we might not know the questions to ask, regarding some of that too. But for the sake of time, it's trying to figure out the efficient way of getting through that.
As we're looking at the council upcoming meeting schedule, and now you've added that third meeting in, we can try to think about, okay, you want reports, maybe you want 20 to 30 minutes per report, so you have the opportunity to have dialogue with staff. I mean, if you feel like that's important and useful and helpful, we can program it into your agendas. And then we just, we're trying to do better about not loading up your meetings. And so, if we know that that's how much time that you want to spend on it, then we'll just program that in.
Yeah. It would be nice. I mean, I guess maybe if there was a heads up from the staff end, if they felt like there was something that they really want to highlight in their monthly report or whatever, if they could, at least give us the heads up on it or something. Because, yeah, I mean, I read the reports and most of the time don't really have any questions, but, by the time we read those reports, it's a week or two later, there may have been some new development on something in there that we're not seeing or whatever.
Maybe some kind of update, or maybe a project that might have been mentioned.
Yeah, if they, I think it's, if the staff feels like it's something pertinent that we should know about, yeah, for sure.
You're saying make it an option.
Yeah, optional. Yeah, I mean,
Same
like,
thing for us. So if we have something to report for MRA, which obviously this year, Colby and I know this, but everybody else doesn't, there's basically nothing, almost gonna be nothing to report all year. But make it optional. Somebody says, hey, I'd like to, if Tracy says, I just want to give you guys a heads up and just kind of have some FaceTime, great. But I think we wouldn't want the pressure to be among staff that now, if they don't, they're not performing.
Right.
They're doing a great job. If you have something that you really, if Chris Curtin wants to give a little punch on something and just be a little more clear, great. But again, I want to go to time. Meaning everybody needs to be concise and because when we get into big meetings and we start in every 5 minutes adds up to be another 2 hours and then everybody's tired.
And, also we give an opportunity for the mayor to also say, hey, just so he can report on what he's been doing. Because he does a lot of things, that he does things with schools or he does, he goes and welcomes some club or whatever. It's a great opportunity for you all to know what he's doing as well. Okay, so I'm hearing that we'll add it to the agenda. We still want to really manage that time. If any one speaker is speaking, it's a 5-minute time that you all just know that. Okay.
Is there a staff member that attends all the liaison activities that we are trying to? In some cases, we're the only city representative there.
In some cases, yes, you're the only representative.
they're having a hard time hearing us that well.
They hear you better.
Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in some cases, there is a staff member, but in most cases, like the library board would have staff, but the McPaws does not. So it just depends.
Renewal has staff, the waterways management plan has a staff member.
Does the sewer board, now we have Julie on that,
And Colby.
Colby's on.
Yeah, on the G-Wag.
The JWAG, yeah, so we do have staff that participates in that as well. So some of those, maybe you guys might see that a staff member reports on maybe something that you attended, maybe you want to expand upon something that they reported on. I don't know. It just will give you that venue to do that now. Okay. All right, the next piece I wanted to talk about is policies on email practices. This is on page 11 of your governance manual, and it talks about that we don't want to violate the open meeting law. So when somebody sends you an email, you don't want to respond to all council members and engage in a conversation, right? So if it's a member of the public, you can answer it generally, but you want to make sure that you CC me or Annette so that we know what's out there, right? And then, but you want to make sure, so sometimes I'll send you guys an email, but I'll blind copy all of you so that it prevents you from reply all and then engaging in a conversation, all of you. So it's really important that you don't conduct city business via email, okay? The other piece of that is I introduced some suggested language to add to the governance manual, and it is regarding the use of personal email. So it's really, really, really important that you only use your city-issued email account, because then it protects your private email from records requests or, just being open. So what we don't want is for you to put a forward on your city email to go into your personal email, because what happens when you reply, think, oh, I'm replying to city business, but I'm replying through my personal account. So So I just had some recommended language to just to deter from that, that as part of your governance manual, that it just calls out, do not forward your city email to your personal email. Make sure that you always use your city email for city business. Does that all make sense?
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
If someone only knows how to contact us through city council, the old friend from college. Hey, I see you're on city council. You're still drinking beer at the same rate you used to? Do we answer that through city council, or is that some type of thing where we don't answer and just start a new deal on our computer?
Just start a new one with your own email. Yeah, and just let it lie. And you want to make sure you don't delete anything. So our email is set up to automatically delete at 2 years and 1 day. So do not delete anything out of your email unless it's a direct solicitation. So that kind of junk mail you can delete. But any kind of correspondence, do not delete anything. Okay? So that's a good question. Yeah. Any other questions about email? So I can bring back at another time the added language and a resolution to modify the governance manual. That's good. Okay. Any other questions or anything about email? Okay, the next piece I wanted. Oh yeah.
Would it be better, for instance, in the case of Black Bear Conrad, if Julie, would it be better if Julie sent her email to you? For instance, as an attorney on a project like that, there's probably gonna be other ones. Would it be better if it went to you rather than her sending it to council?
Yes, I do prefer, I even tell members of the public to send all their comments to me. That way then I can make sure that they get to who they need to go to.
Rather than Julie sending
To
it
the council. Yeah, and that too can, help with public perception too, so.
And I just send it to you and.
Yeah.
But this should be the last.
Yeah, so like if you send it to Dr. Joe, it goes to everybody rather than if you're sending it to us. My concern is that public perception would be like, well, wait a minute. How's this work? She's on council, she has this, but then she's sending it to the council members. Is it, it'd be cleaner, it seems like. Just goes to Dr. Joe, safer.
Yeah, and that's good for all of you. And if you have constituents that want to make comments, please encourage them to go to the online portal to make those comments or to email me. So
And this hasn't happened yet, but if somebody emails us through the city council or through our city email or personal and then forward it to, the city email, if they just send us a comment letter, said before is what we should do is to you and respond and just say, thank you, please submit this. At the public hearing or as a general comment at city council.
yeah. That way then I know that I have all of those comments and that they become part of the record and everybody that needs them gets them.
Somebody sent you an email and said, would you please give me a call about this? So it's one-on-one to you. And and so there's no really record of the call.
Well, I guess it depends on what it is. So if it's anything land use, your response would be, oh, please put your comment through the proper channels for public hearing. And don't engage in a conversation. If it's just general things and, that during the council update, you can say, oh, I talked to Joe Public and he was interested in electric vehicles for the city. So, that's it that way.
One thing that's come up and talked about in the past while too, and then big comment that I think go with. If somebody reaches out to me via email or phone call and says, I've got this concern, whatever it is, is that, well, I want to hear their concern, but what the best response is like, I think everybody on council would want to hear your concern. Therefore, would you mind emailing Bessie Joe or put it in the portal so we all get the information? What that also does from it keeps something out of us, because we want all of us to hear their concerns. And if somebody just is kind of just bending our ear on something, we're not doing a service to the community in the best way because everybody should know. And then that gives them more, power to communicate to the group. And it also takes the possibility of Lyle said. And then there's also those conversations that some people call. I mean, I get the calls of people that, and I want them, right? We want people to reach out to all of us. We all get them, I'm sure. Is, people that feel comfortable with us and want to talk about ideas or things that are going on. It's like we can vet that out. But if it comes to the point of, yes, I want to listen and hear, and I will do my best to help communicate this. But the best thing is it coming from you, whoever, to all of us. And I hear you, but we all need it, right?
Yep. And you're gonna have conversations with your constituents because that's the nature of your role, right? So you're gonna have conversations, you're gonna have people approach you, you're gonna have people call you, and so that's just the nature of being an elected official. You just have to know that if it's anything land use related, that you don't talk about it, and encourage them, like Mike said, to put in a comment so that we can all see that and we can all discuss it. So,
One quick thing: if you do get contacted by people that are unhappy with the service they received from the city, or have a complaint about an employee, or something like that, a specific interaction that's not like a policy issue, like fixed short-term rentals or whatever, but they're like, I'm very unhappy because so-and-so, the snow plowed at my mailbox, whatever. That type of stuff should come to me and operational, so I can address that, especially if it's a complaint about an employee or personnel.
lots of discussion. Great. All right. So are we good with comments and email and yeah? Okay. So the next piece is your meeting agendas and packets. So there has been some confusion as to how council members may add topics to the agenda. Staff is recommending that during the upcoming meeting schedule on every regular meeting agenda, that if a council member has a topic they would like council's action on, they would bring it up during that time. That gives the rest of the council the opportunity to head nod to say, oh yeah, let's put this on a future agenda, or now we don't want to go down that road. And then, so I'd like to hear from you guys about that, because we've had some people, coming up with ideas to put things on the agenda that's outside of a meeting, which, it is your meeting. So, but this way it gives the entire council the opportunity to say, yeah, we want it on a future agenda, or no, we don't.
During the upcoming meetings discussion at the end of the meeting, if
Yeah.
Julie says, listen, I want to put on the agenda a discussion about X, Y, or Z, we're going to talk about it at that point in time, and just decide as a group whether or not it's going to come onto the agenda.
Yeah, strictly of whether or not it's going to be on the agenda, not talk about the topic itself, but strictly, hey, you guys want this on a future agenda?
I think just also thinking if one council member had a really insistent that something was on the agenda, there was not much support for that. If the one person adamant about something, I guess we would say in that discussion, if anybody were that adamant about it, it would get on the discussion. then it's not a majority, it's not like a vote, but it gets on, it's a discussion. Mayor would have to say, it is or isn't.
I think it'd be by, generally speaking, by vote, because we're all gonna function in a professional way of listening to each other. And if you had something, for instance, that was really impassioned for you, and said, I really wanna have this on, we have the discussion, and if there's not a calling reason to not have it, or what have you, legal reason, or what have you, then maybe we do need to have it. Or maybe we decide, right?
Well, remember that it's not,
Choose.
it would not be an actionable item, right? So it would be, oh, hey, Julie wants, sorry, Tanya.
Hey, everyone's picking on me.
Julie wants to talk about.
Is this a feeling of I'm gonna kind of be a pain and stuff?
We're trying to make you feel included.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I just want you to feel included.
Yeah, so she says, oh, I'm really interested in the city having all blue cars. I want them all to be blue. And so I really want to have a discussion about that. And then the council goes, no, it's not worth our time. So then you say, okay, then we're done. Or maybe you go, oh yeah, that's a really good discussion item. Let's put it on the agenda coming forward. That's it. Like, you don't want it drawn out. You don't want to talk about, well, I don't know. Do we want blue cars or do we want green cars? Or, well, do you really think that blue cars are important? You don't want to talk about the subject. You'll only want to talk about putting it on a future agenda. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it will be somewhat by consensus, meaning if it came down to any kind of tension, Mayor would just call for a vote on it, yes or no.
Well, we can't do both because a discussion item is not an action item, right?
I guess the idea is if four people are like, no, then chances of the discussion going anywhere, if you put it on the agenda, is not likely
good
gonna
point.
happen.
And let me add one caveat to that. If there's something that you think you want to bring up at that time, ask Bessie, Joe, or Annette first. Because it might be something that's already been the lead balloon 3 times before. There's no sense in bringing it up. And you don't need to run down that rabbit hole.
So before the meeting, just shoot an email and say, hey, I was thinking about bringing this up.
Or just get,
Yeah.
pick up the phone and give them a call.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you just kind of find out, oh yeah, because it might be somebody, pick on Julie again, because she's
Oh,
the.
man. Even you, Bill?
It's the person in town who's, there's a new council person, and this is my shot. And so they buttonhole you at the post office, say, I think the council ought to do this. Because you're the new person and they struck out with everybody else ever. And so you bring it up and you don't know that that's never gone anywhere before. And that's your shot with staff to find out, oh, John Johnson got you at the post office, didn't he? And so that's just a way of avoiding that sort of thing. And, or maybe knowing some history before, but you still may say, no, I still want to talk about it.
Well, right, I was gonna say there could be maybe this happened a few years ago and the community now is ready to want to hear that, so.
So just a caveat to that,
Or it might be in the works somewhere. We might already know that it's in the works. And so if you contact me or Annette, we could say, oh, well, yeah, the staff member's already working on that and we hope to get it on the schedule soon.
I like that approach.
Yeah, me too, that's really helpful.
Okay.
Been shot down a few times about adding discussion items. So.
And I did get buttonholed when appointed. There was a couple people just waiting for me. Oh, wow. Yeah, okay, great.
Okay, and so then the other question that I had for you, so I wanted to know, are you guys happy with your packet? Are you happy with the information that you're getting? Do you feel like you're getting too much, not enough? Are they timely? How do you feel, what do you feel about the packet?
I think it's really very complete and well done, and it's nice having it approximately a week in advance or 4 days in advance. That's great.
Oh, yeah, the timeliness is always impeccable. The only thing, we used to have an agenda with, here I go, yeah. We used to have an agenda with time.
We still do, I just forget to send it out, so
Okay.
I will be better about sending out the agenda with times. My apologies.
I think that has value.
Okay.
I know I'm beating the same drum there, but on timing and being efficient. But anyways, that is helpful. And then, because then we can try to stick to that, and then we know that if we stick to it, we're gonna hit a certain target. And I know I've got a little type A in there going on with this stuff, but, the only thing that I find hard is, and I like the online packet, but it's just, and it's probably, I just need to like separate it when I'm going through everything in advance, but we have so much in the reports and consent agenda and all this that I find myself scrolling back and forth between the agenda or I print off a paper copy of the agenda, or I have a different opening page of the agenda, and then you get down to the, so it's like, I don't have a suggestion to make it better, but it's almost like maybe I just need to separate it so that I've got all the agenda bills as a separate item, and then I've got all the other stuff
We know it's all bookmarked.
on the left side
Yeah,
of
so
the
if you open
Adobe.
up the tab on the left-hand side, it's all bookmarked. And so you can
Oh.
go down and you can
Oh,
click
so
and
you
it'll take
don't
you.
have to scroll through. Okay, see,
Well, I didn't know that, and I was gonna say, actually, what I,
55, I'm starting to like, this is my ability to work with technology already.
if that doesn't work for you, what I did was I printed the agenda out and I put the PDF page number next to each item, so that way when we move to it, especially if you have to skip through a lot, like if it's an actual, like the Black Bear condo had a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you just go up to the top and put that PDF page number in there and hit return, and it'll.
Now, remember, I do, sometimes, alter that packet if we get more items. I update the packet online whenever I send you additional stuff so that it's totally transparent to the public as well. So that's why I quit numbering the pages on the packet, is because then when you add stuff in there, it messes it all up. But yeah, the bookmarking is.
So that's the left tab.
Yeah, it's up on and it has looks like a little square with lines on it, and yeah, depends on what are you all PCs or
Change your life.
no?
Yeah.
I've never, really simple thing I haven't looked at. Okay, it doesn't work on my phone, but it'll work on my computer. And it's
Yeah, and I can show you that too.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I feel really silly with that question, but thank you.
No, that's great.
Still end up scrolling through the 50 pages of whatever.
Land use applications with the P and Z one, and then the one before that, and then the one that it came through council before, and now it's back at council, and you're like, which one are we going off of the development agreement?
Yeah, and I try to bookmark when you have a big land use. I try to bookmark those pages as well. So that you can also maneuver through that as well. All right. So paper versus digital. So I know during this COVID world, we went to all digital. Now, are you all, maybe now with the bookmarking, the digital will be a little easier. Are you all still good with the digital versus paper? If there's ever any, like, maybe you want one piece of the agenda printed for you or something, all you have to do is ask and we will print whatever you need. So just know that that's always an option. We've saved a few trees going digital, but we also want you guys to get the information that you need in the format that you need it. So if you need paper, please let me know and we can make that happen. Okay? All right. Then real quick, the order on the agenda. So we have, so this is the basics of how we've been setting it up. We have to call to order, pledge of allegiance, approve the agenda, approve the consent agenda, public comment, presentations, reports, public hearing, work session, business agenda, executive session. Are you guys good with that order? Do you like the reports up front and the presentations up front, even before public hearings? Are you all good with that?
Well, I might put the work session afterwards. My concern is people that get on to online to listen for topics. It'd be better probably for them to don't have to wait until 10 o'clock for the topic to come up that they're interested in, those things happen at the front end. So if we have a work session, for instance, that's not an action item, that people may not be as interested in, maybe that could go later.
Okay, so you're saying that you'd like to see the work session towards the end of the meeting. So it'd be business and then work session.
I think just because when we have people making public comments, public hearing, and we have business agenda bills that we need to make decisions on, that's the meat of the meeting for the general public. So it just seems like, subject to everybody else's thoughts on this, that if we have like a work session, and like we always have our executive session at the end if we're going to do one, and if whenever that's rare, but when that comes up, or it just seems like if we're going to talk about a work session type of those ideas and presenting something new, but it's not an action item, it's not something the public's going to comment on, it's not something you need to worry, we're going to make a decision on, that could go later, just so that if we do get to 10 o'clock, the general public that's listening they know that they can kind of get to where they are, they're not just sitting there waiting for, or like, for instance, in the agenda too, I guess the other thing I would add is, look at one like last night, like, what are some of the items that are action items are pretty simple. I mean, it's like Delta is putting in for a grant. It's like great work, fantastic. But meanwhile, we got things like land use applications. We've got session thing like we had last night. These couple things that people are interested in. Seems like stacking it to the things that people in our community are most interested in, having it all kind of together and towards the front would be better. The thing that way, if it comes to us just kind of needing to check some boxes on signing off on our health insurance or whatever it is, like, I don't know that the general public is as concerned about that as they are about a new subdivision in their backyard. So if we keep those together, might be beneficial to like, because then you get to, and then the other thing is you get to the end of the meeting and it's like, well, these are things we just need to sign off on. Like, they're practically consent agenda items. And so the ones that are practically consent agenda items, those ones don't take a lot of thought. They don't take a lot of, they don't take a lot of research. Other people aren't as interested in. Maybe we could just kind of move those that way. If it's 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and we're running late, and people are getting a little beat up and tired from that, we can just move through those, and then we're not coming in with one more big one at the end, and we're not in as good a position to make a good decision for the community. What do you guys think about that? Am I taking too much time?
No, you're not taking too much time. It's a good discussion, and I think it's not. I will say this though, in defense of the folks that put the agenda together. There are many times that we get surprised by the interest. It might be a work session that they're really interested in, and we hear about it later. So I think there's some art involved in trying to do that, but I think that is a good practice to have things that we know our community wants to weigh in, like a public hearing. Try to put those up front like it was last night.
Mm-hmm.
And then the things that are routine, if we can guess that. We don't think, I think there is some wisdom in putting that towards.
So so I'm hearing a little bit with the work session could go either direction, because sometimes it could be something that somebody's really interested in.
Well, you never know. I mean, I believe that there's been some examples where a work session, there's been tremendous interest. So I would leave it up to the people that are putting the agenda together with Annette's input and your input, go and try to figure that out. But I think Mike makes a really good point. That shows respect for our interested public.
Chloe, what do you think?
I think the way it's set up now works pretty well because that we do, it is a broad range, for instance, last night we kept Tracy on the line until 10 o'clock, and I feel kind of bad when that's one of those check mark items, but it takes a city staff person waiting until the very end of the meeting to give the presentation. And that's, for me, that's kind of challenging. Value the city staff time at the meetings, and how do we acknowledge that and try to keep that part timely. But it's a challenge too, because there are discussions that are going to be longer than others, and have control of that. And I think it is valuable to be able to have the discussions, recognizing we need to keep timely, but I would rather have a discussion and go over time than be a slave to the clock and be like, hey, time's up, we gotta keep moving. And I don't think I think the way it's set up now, I mean, generally we do put kind of the bigger topics up in the front of the meeting. Work session varies, some of them are short, some of them are long. Whether or not, our Friday work session, but I mean, I feel like you guys do a good job of trying to figure out where everything fits in best as possible.
Probably good. I can add to that is the work sessions that we do in our meetings, is it not feasible to have some of those on a Friday? There's sometimes where we have a Friday work session and, we can knock it out in an hour and a half, and we generally slot 3 hours for a work session. Again, I mean, it goes back to, I think everybody gets tired when the meeting goes after 10 o'clock at night, and I think it happens after 9 o'clock. I mean, is it feasible to have work sessions on our Fridays?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can definitely, oh yeah, we can do that. We can look at, try not to put any work sessions on the regular meeting and only do work sessions on Fridays or that extra meeting. That extra meeting might be a really good place to do some of those work session items. On the next agenda, we have the short-term rental work session. Well, we have 30 minutes allotted, but we all know that's probably go an hour because it's such a big topic, right? So, so we can definitely look at that, look at pushing them to the Friday meetings and then if the Friday meetings fill up, pushing them to that first Thursday for work sessions.
We gotta talk on this, because I feel like one of your concerns is that you feel like our meetings are more efficient and we're sharper when we keep it to a certain amount of time.
Yes, I agree with your observations on that. I really do.
So if we push the work sessions into work sessions, for instance, if we have a work session on short-term rentals, this is a big thing, and there's a lot of information to it. And if we were doing a work session on workforce housing, I mean, these are some pretty key, big things. I know, speaking for myself, I want to be fresh. I want to be alert. I want to have my notes. I don't want to be beat up by listening to 45 minutes of somebody talking about something that's not that relevant, which we do get in our meetings at times. And it's they need, sometimes we have people present or talk in our meetings where they're acting as if they're the only subject on our meeting, and you hear my frustration there. But it's why I've asked that we don't have a COVID update in our meeting in person. I want it in writing personally. I don't want to have this, 45-minute conversation about something we can't control. And that we're out of emergency. I mean, we're all concerned about it, but at the same time, maybe we don't have that's going to take up all this time in the meeting. We can just get the report rather than all the commentary. And similarly, we have work sessions that are important, and there's a lot to them, and we need to be fresh. And if it's later in the meeting, we're not so fresh. And sometimes when we have land use applications coming later, we've had recommendation by either Bill or somebody else saying, maybe you guys should move this to another meeting. So my impassioned kind of like discussion on this is, that seems like a really good idea to keep our work sessions.
I
What do you
agree. I do agree. And, when we put them in as a half hour in a regular meeting, I feel that we're rushed.
Yeah.
And those work sessions, I think, are our time to be really creative.
Yep.
Because they're hard topics. I also think that would get at your observation about public interest. Some of those things, let's say short-term rentals, let's say workforce housing, two different topics that would be appropriate for a work session. If those were to occur on either a Friday morning, one of them, and another one occurred on a third Thursday, I think there'd be a tremendous interest as a public meeting, people could call in or listen in or whatever. So I think that would hit at both those things that you're talking about.
That's a good point.
And I think we do, my observation is as a group, we do better when we focus on one thing that's really hard, using those examples.
What do you think?
I like using the work session. That's without all the other noise.
That way we can have a little more of a dialogue and not feel like
We're
rushed, I mean, if we want to spend a little more time on it and Miles got some thoughts and he wants to kind of really vet it out, we want to have a vibrant discussion like we were able to have today. Where this discussion is good, but we're not going to have this discussion in a regular meeting because we're trying to move through an agenda.
Correct.
What do you think, Lyle?
I agree. Sessions, move to Friday or
Colby?
Agreed. I think it'd be super helpful because it is challenging, in the keeping in your mind the rest of the agenda that's after this discussion is definitely detracts a little bit and adds that pressure. It keep moving here. So I think it kind of curbs the discussion on some important issues of trying to get through something, especially if there's like a public hearing right afterwards. So I think that would be helpful, as long as it's timely, like the topics, if that fits in with, the timeliness of it. If there's an occasion where city staff needs input on something between the, whatever, I feel like maybe flexible, but I think generally trying to do those work sessions, just keeping work sessions super helpful.
Right?
The topic's very controversial. Hopefully a Thursday evening. I do hear people say, I can't attend a Friday morning because I work.
And remember, everything's recorded.
But it is a lot easier for people to participate or be present
Sure.
that Thursday evening versus the Friday morning.
I need a restroom break. Is it down this way or?
Nope, right here.
No, right down this way.
Unless you.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, and
If you want more privacy, I can give you a card to go down.
Oh, this is.
we're wrapping up, so, the only thing I had was if you had anything else you wanted to, for future consideration as far as the governance manual goes. We had some great discussion today. I really, really appreciate that. It really helps staff be more efficient for you all, and kinds of discussions are very valuable for us.
You do a great job, and it's just, we just all want to keep refining and keep doing the best job we can, right?
Yep.
And you do a great job.
All right, well, let's take a quick break. Everybody can get some coffee, and then we'll turn it over to Bill.
Trying to get sleepy, Bill.
Make sure we have the
Perfect.
Oh, okay.
Then you can look at me and you can tell me if you're heel down, or if you're going forward, or am I down here?
Can't do the skating thing.
It will lag you.
You'd be willing to go out for an hour,
Yeah.
go to the activity barn or something?
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be good.
Okay.
So,
So you'll be surprised.
I would love it. I would love it.
I can't do it.
Well, you could, but no, just go cross. Because I don't really want to get skates. Okay,
You're going out with Lyle?
that's what I need.
Yeah, I see him out there. He's fast.
Well, he was in the Olympics a few times.
I know.
One time I went by Julia and I had, I passed these people. The last off and it was still snow and I was waiting up my ski. You and I were skiing together and I went, oh, I must look like the klutz of all time. And it passed me so confident.
The other thing about it, I just found my first kind of go of it is that it's a better alternative to doing sit-ups. Just double pull.
Yeah,
Oh,
The same
yeah.
motion as sit-ups, but you're actually outside doing something fun.
yeah,
And you're using your shoulders and arms too,
Yeah.
so you
yeah.
get a extra added
Yeah.
workout.
Yeah, cross-country skiing, one of the best workouts in the world. Okay, so I'm gonna give you, some training on public hearings and hopefully not put you to sleep, although Colby set a really low bar for me. So, first of all, I think you guys do a really good job. Okay, so let me start with that. And not everybody does, but I think you do. You have a good, first of all, you have really, really good staff that tease it up for you well on all your public hearings. So there are all kinds of different kinds of hearings, right? So to start with, let's differentiate the different kinds of hearings that you have. You have a general kind of a hearing. So, and that's where you do something where you want to receive input from the public. So in a sense, that's a public hearing because you're receiving input from the public, but it's general. So that might be something like some of these topics you talked about, like short-term rentals or workforce housing, or some of the other kind of general topics that you have in front of you. So those are hearings in the sense that they're public, but they're not specific to somebody's property. Okay? But then you have what we call quasi-judicial hearings. And those are the ones that involve a specific piece of property. So in the overall scheme of things, that's the ones that we're really going to talk about today, are those quasi-judicial public hearings, right? There's a difference between quasi-judicial decision and a legislative decision. Who can tell me the difference? Okay?
Okay.
Okay, I'll take, this is a chance for Julie, our newest council member, to shine.
So, legislative is making laws, policy, and quasi-judicial is when you're kind of acting as a court or a judge, or taking evidence from the public, from the applicant, and planning applications to approve or not.
Okay, so, right, so you're applying the law and facts of some kind to a specific.
I forgot the law part.
Yeah. To a specific issue. Thing about a legislative decision, you don't even have to have facts, right? The legislature's in session. They don't even have to have facts to make policy. Critical race theory is bad. You know what it is? Well, we just know it's bad. And so we're going to ban it from schools. But what is it? Well, I don't know, but it's bad. Well, it may be bad, but they can't even define it. So, so that's the difference. With a legislative decision, you don't even have to have facts. You can just make a policy and you can enact a policy. That's a legislative decision. And so legislative decisions are not challengeable based upon the quality of the facts that go into that decision. A quasi-judicial decision, you have to have law, you have to have facts. So that's why a public hearing is important. All right. So our jurisprudence regarding land use hearings in particular, quasi-judicial public hearings, is rooted in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which, in summary, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So, in the context that you live in your role as city council members, it's that property interest and due process of law. So, someone who comes in front of you with an application dealing with a specific piece of property has certain rights. Their neighbors have property rights. Even the people who rent the property next door under a lease have property rights. So we want to make sure that their property rights are protected by due process. So that's the effect that we're trying to protect here. Okay? All right, so let's look at that. So really we're looking at the due process of law piece. All right, so where becomes important? Where can we hold these public hearings? Give me an idea. Is where we hold the public hearing important?
Yes,
Okay, in what way?
has access, probably ADA, reasonable access to, public in terms of number of people in the room, audio, visual capacity, and in an area that has jurisdiction over the area of proximity to the jurisdiction being decided. That's my first law, non-law.
Exactly. It's important. We have to have the hearing itself in a place that's accessible to people. People with physical disabilities, people can hear, people can see, people can participate in the process. It's important that the public hearing be held in a way that people can meaningfully participate. We can't hold the hearings someplace where folks can't get to. It was a challenge during COVID, but we managed to find a way to do that most of the time for folks. But still, there was a way to do that. Okay? What about the who part? would be important for the public hearing under that circuit?
I think, general public, if they have an interest, and certainly people who have a specific interest, meaning that they were given, notification, proper, agenda, and then the people who are actually going to present, who make the decision, at of decision.
Okay, so we're talking about notice. Okay. So to whom should notice be given, and how should that notice be given? So who ought to get notice?
Neighbors and the public.
Okay, general public. Why the general public?
Well, if I'm talking in the newspaper, then people have the opportunity to comment.
So, and this is where sometimes some of us run contrary to folks like certain communities or the Association of Idaho Cities who wants to be able to publish electronically and not necessarily in print media. A printed notice in the Star News may reach people who don't what? Exactly. Okay. And so the printed notice of the hearings in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission or in front of the City Council has the opportunity to inform the public of certain proceedings that are going to be in front of those two bodies. Gives them at least an idea that there's something that might be happening at a certain address, okay? And then who else besides the general public? Said neighbors?
Immediate neighbors, there's definitions that I sometimes see it used in a land use, public hearing.
Okay, so statutorily says property owners within 300 feet, okay? There's also another provision under certain circumstances that calls for a different kind of a publication, depending upon the nature of whatever the use that's proposed is, so forth. But the idea being that an affected person gets an actual notice of the public hearing. And why would they get the notice? And exactly. So the idea being that they get invited to come provide information to the decision makers, right? So come tell us what you think about this proposal, right? Okay, so the notice piece becomes important. All right. So who's going to make the decision?
Who's going to make the decision of what's being.
At the public hearing. At the public hearing, who's going to make the decision? Okay, in this case, City Council. What are your qualifications to make that decision? Right. So the community, the electors in the community said, we want you. We want you to set policy for our community. We want you to make these kinds of decisions. We trust you, or at least majority of electors said they trust you. But there's also some who said, we don't trust you, right? Okay. So what are they looking for? What should they be looking for in you as decision makers? what's an ideal decision maker in that setting?
Actually, very good in the community or looking after the majority of people in the community.
Well, perhaps.
I think they also expect us to be objective and in touch with, in other words, listening to the input, evaluating the input, understanding what's legally possible, things like that, a rational decision.
Okay. See, Mike, in the legislative context, I think you're right. The quasi-judicial context, you may not be right. In the quasi-judicial context, what you're expected to be is unbiased. In the quasi-judicial context, you're expected to be neutral and to approach the application on an even-handed basis. That someone who comes before you has an even shot. That you're sitting there in much the same way that a judge approaches a case, okay? So some of those things include things like the question that gets asked now before a public hearing, which is, do any of you have any conflicts of interest? Okay. So there's a little statute which will pass around so that you get a little take home here, which is the state statute on conflicts of interest. Okay. So it's a specific statute that talks about when a decision maker should recuse themselves from that decision-making process, okay? And it talks specifically about a financial or a personal conflict. And it's not just for you individually, but also anyone who's related to you by affinity, meaning by marriage, or by consanguinity, which is by blood. And if you don't, and it goes down, I think, to the second degree. If you're not sure what that is, I recommend that you download the Attorney General's Ethics and Governance Manual. And in that manual, in the back, the Attorney General has at least provided a consanguinity chart, which describes when you're related in the first, second, or third degree, so that you can kind of see that, okay? So that you get an idea of when someone is within that scope of relationship. So either by marriage or blood, within a certain degree, does someone have some sort of personal or financial interest of some kind? But in today's society, what's missing in that definition? You see anything missing in that definition?
Yes.
And what is that?
That exact word of conjugal, whatever. I mean, you're not married, but you are third household, or you're in a relationship, whatever type of relationship.
Exactly. That's a hole in the statute. Okay. So there are folks who are in a close, intimate relationship with one another, and this statute doesn't cover that. So I would argue that people who find themselves in that kind of intimate relationship need to apply the same sort of standard. Okay? But it gives you the tool here to say, okay, well, and again, why is it here? Because we want the process to be clean. We don't want someone to come in later and say, well, yeah, it was Colby's cousin, and that's why they got that approved. You know, Colby made the motion to approve it. All right, so what's the process if you're not sure whether you have a conflict or not? Anybody have an idea what the process should be? You're not sure? Huh?
We asked you.
Okay, that's one idea. All right. So at the beginning of the public hearing, when Bob asks, as the mayor, does anybody have a conflict? If one of you says, well, I don't know, but 2 years ago, when I lived over on Lick Creek, I lived next door to the applicant. I moved 2 years ago, but I used to live next door to him. I don't live next door to them anymore. But I lived there for 3 years. They were neighbors of mine. And I think y'all ought to know that. That discloses to the entire council and the public that you know the applicant. Is that a conflict under this statute? Probably not. But what does it do in the process when you make that statement?
Well, Phil's crossing and
Puts it out on the table.
Yeah.
And then you ask the council, you can say, I don't think it's a conflict, but I need you to know this. And the council can say, I don't think it's a conflict. The council can clear you of that conflict. And then you can continue to deliberate, okay? So when in doubt, disclose and have the council clear you or say, well, yeah, that's your ex-spouse to whom you're continuing to make spousal support payments, and the success of this development is going to have a bearing on your relationship. So maybe you ought not be making the vote on that case, whatever it is. So, when in doubt, disclose it, right? So again, we want to have unbiased decision makers, and we want to have the appearance of propriety. We don't want to have the appearance of impropriety where somebody's throwing rocks later on, okay? Bessie Jo covered this before in the governance manual discussion, and Mike, I thought you did a pretty good job. Somebody wants to talk to you about something. I call this problem at the post office because in a town like this, a lot of people get their mail at the post office. And everybody knows when the mail truck is done and when the mail's all sorted. So nobody goes to the post office until they know the mail's all sorted. So that's when everybody tends to be there. So when you're at the post office and somebody says, Bob, I want to talk to you about that, fill in the blank. I want to talk to you about this new grocery store. I want to talk to you about this new fueling station. I want to talk to you about these new apartments. What should your response be? And their constituents, you want to be responsive to them. What's the best response to make under those circumstances?
I appreciate your input, want to hear it, thanks for reaching out, but we send it to the portal so that we can all see it. All here.
Exactly. What you have to say is really, really important. The entire council would really appreciate your input. But under the law of the state of Idaho, it's best if you put that in writing, send it to the clerk so that she can distribute it to the entire council at once, so that it's not just me that hears it. That way it goes out to everybody. But what if you can't get away from them? And again, I'm gonna pick on Julie because my perception is she's really, really nice. And she doesn't want to offend anybody. And they've got her backed into a corner and they proceed to give her the 5-minute speech of what's right or wrong about the land use application. So what should she do when it comes up for hearing in front of the city council? Right. Okay. There was a case, there's an Idaho Supreme Court case that involved an old furniture warehouse building in Boise. And when the case came up for public hearing, some of the city council members said, I got a lot of calls on this. And that's all he more or less said. And then when it went up on appeal, the Supreme Court in its wisdom said, well, that wasn't good enough. And so they remanded it back. They said, city council should have said who the calls were from, what was said, what the reply was. And so what Julie should say in that circumstance is, I was at the post office and Joe Small got me into a corner and proceeded to tell me why he liked this project or why he didn't like this project. And I told him he should put it in writing so the entire council could hear it. And that was our entire interaction. Then it's on the record as to what she received and what her response was. That way, anybody in favor of the project could respond to that comment. Anybody opposed to the project respond to that. But at least there was some way of addressing that ex parte contact that was made. Okay? I mean, it's a small town. Folks know you. They're going to run into you in Albertsons or Ridley's or the post office or at school or someplace. And so you can expect this sort of thing. But to keep the process clean, we disclose ex parte contacts at the beginning of the hearing. All right, another sort of thing that we probably ought to, what I call special knowledge. And this is where you know something about the property just because. Okay? And maybe it's because you've lived here all your life. Maybe it's because you're in the real estate business and you've listed the property 4 times and you sold it 2 out of the 4 listings. Maybe it's because your friend owned the property for 10 years and you had lots of dinners at their house. Maybe there's some special knowledge you've got about the property. Okay? Similar sort of thing ought to apply there at the beginning of the hearing. I know something about this property because. So, my turn to pick on Mike. We had that floodplain parcel piece a few years ago.
That's what I was thinking.
And I think you'd listed it twice. And so because at some point, okay, there you go. Because that was a property that you had knowledge about, at the beginning of the hearing, we probably should, if I'd have known that, I would have had you disclose that.
Should have done it up front, not during the discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Relative to that, to the upfront, if we know we have inside knowledge, or special knowledge, can we send that to Bessie Joe prior to, so it can get in the public record, rather than disclosing it up front? We had enough lead time to do that.
Well, you could. I think it'd be the kind of thing where probably to me or Bill Punkeney, so that we know exactly when to disclose it. It's definitely got to be disclosed. The idea being that you want to give everybody in the process the opportunity to adjust to the fact that the decision maker has some knowledge of the property. Okay? And maybe even to object to your objectivity in the decision process. Just the fact that you know something about it because you've lived here for however many decades, that may not be the issue. But we just want to be careful about those things so that everybody operates from the same basis. What we don't want to have is a decision maker who's got special knowledge that's participating in the decision and nobody else knows about it. We're all out on the table. This is all out in the open, is what we want. Okay?
So using Mike's example that many of us can relate to, flood prone area. Like, in the future, when that comes up, it would be disclosed at the beginning, verbally, and the council would say, well, we don't think that's a problem. We probably would ask you for your input. In that case, my opinion probably would say it's okay to disclose.
And because I've had other times where we've had somebody making an application on something. And I've said up front, I said, listen, I represented this individual 4 years ago and had an agency relationship with them through my brokerage at that time, but I have not had an agency since. Is that a conflict? What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, so it's just a matter of we put all the cards out on the table so that the folks can adjust to it, whether it's the opponents, if there are. I mean, most of the time, stuff is not controversial, right? Most of the time, it's not something where there's opposition, but when there is, it's always nice to make sure that we followed all of the processes all of the time, so it's second nature, that we're doing it every time, just other than everybody can address things as they come up.
On the ex parte example you gave about the board you go in, and when we have people in the community speak to us, or you're walking down the street and somebody says, hey, I'm really not happy about this, or somebody goes out on a call, But say, hey, Greg, put make public comment, let everybody hear your thoughts, their valuable thoughts. But the person's like, well, I just want you to understand where we or I'm coming from or what have you. Should we then say, are you recommending that we say to that individual, like I made reference to somebody called me, related to a topic last night, but it wasn't really for me to say their name because they didn't actually put a public comment in, and I think they called that individual called other council members as well.
Well, that wasn't a quasi-judicial matter, that particular one, right? That was
Right,
the
it was not.
concession agreement.
Yeah.
That wasn't a quasi-judicial matter.
But still, is it best to say to an individual who called us, that if somebody calls me, says, hey, I've already called one other council member I know, I wanted to let them know my thoughts. To me, I want to let you know my thoughts. And I say, I want to hear your thoughts, they're important, and also please put it in the public comment, because it can be the general public comment, or it can be specific to a land use application or whatever it might be. But should we say like, hey, I'm going to need to disclose that we have this conversation. Are you okay with that? Or how do you see best to handle that?
Okay, so it's not first of all, it's not with their permission that you disclose. You have to disclose. If it's quasi-judicial, you have to disclose. All right, so when Joe Small calls and says, I'm opposed to the apartments on Colorado Street, then you have to say, okay, Joe, it's best that you put this in writing so the entire council has it, or you appear at the public hearing and put your testimony on the record. And if Joe says, well, I may or may not do that, but I just wanted you to know. And it's up to you whether you say to Joe, well, Joe, I have to disclose this contact on the record. But regardless of whether you tell Joe that or not, you have to say on the record, when the mayor asks the question, have you had any contact? You have to say yes. On January 28th, Joe Small called me and said he was opposed to this application. I encouraged him to put his comments in writing or appear at this public hearing and testify that I want on the record that he called and this is what he said and this is my response, was to encourage him to make his opposition part of the record. And that way, I mean, again, you don't make it contingent upon his permission because legally you have to disclose it. Okay? And if you want to tell him that you will disclose his opposition as part of the record, you certainly can do that. But you just have to start taking notes or do something, because the worst thing you can do is say, well, I've gotten calls. Some were opposed and some were in favor, and I didn't really pay attention to any of them, and I've got an open mind. Can't do that.
Right, well, we've heard in the past from, like, there was a council member now that would make a lot of statements like, well, I'm hearing everybody's telling me that. I think, so again, and then that kind of begs to the question of like, well, what we really want is communication from the individuals, their address and their comments, that weren't going to keep us out of that. That seems like it's, if I say, well, everybody's saying this, it seems a little. Then if it's a land use application, you're saying, well, then technically you need to say who, right? If it's quasi-judicial, then we need to say who. So if somebody says, well, I'm hearing they were wherever, and hearing these things from people, if it's a land use application, then
Right.
you disclose who those individuals are that are saying I'm in favor or opposed or whatever.
Yeah, so under the terms of that Boise Historic Preservation case, that's what the court said. That the decision makers were required to disclose who contacted them, what they said, and what they said in response to what was said. Okay?
one other comment, if you're at a public meeting or attending something and the general conversation shifts over to something that's quasi judicial, and there's a lot of comments in a public setting, and you're there and you hear them, you just disclose that at the front of the meeting, I attended this meeting, there was a lot of comments, the general nature of those comments was this.
And that's acceptable. That's different because that's not first of all, if it's a public, when you say a public meeting, give me an example of what kind of meeting.
I was thinking of the different committees in town, but let's say,
Or if you're at
You're
a party
against
or
that.
something and they're not talking directly to you, but you overhear talking about it, is that?
yeah, if you're in a med staff meeting and somebody goes, yeah, I can't believe such and such, and 4 or 5 people at the med staff, hospital people make reference to some kind of property issue next to the hospital, but the hospital was denied the opportunity to employ housing on this piece of property because such and such. So you're a member of that committee, you're on city council, and the committee speaks to some issue that's going to come up before city council.
Well, again, you can say I was at I was on such and such a date, I was in this setting and I overheard a conversation which people were complaining about this. I mean, you can always throw that on the record and say you overheard a conversation. That's typically not the kind of thing the court is concerned about. Courts are concerned about somebody buttonholing Lyle Nelson somewhere and getting Lyle's attention and trying to persuade Lyle one way or another, not just the fact that Lyle was around the corner from some conversation. Okay? Okay.
So can I go back, just
Sure.
and ask a question? When you were talking originally in this conference about the quasi judicial versus legislative, and you said, well, yeah, that's interesting community, maybe legislative, but not, say, a quasi judicial land use application. So what I heard you say, I think, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, is that a land use application, you're saying that basically we are quasi like alternative to a judicial situation, that we are making somewhat judicial decisions related to the entitlements on a property, and therefore we should be treating those in a very objective manner to some degree. So, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, can you kind of clarify for us so that we're all kind of coming from the same page? Like, so when we look at a land use application, we're making a decision on it. Number one, and I'm just throwing some things out there that I'm asking for clarification on, but again, just so that is number one, does it fit within code? So number one, if we are quasi judges, the court, then we're looking at it objectively and saying, well, okay, does this fit within code? They're saying they on 1.5 parking spaces, but code says 2 for condos. So we're deciding, do these pieces all fit together based upon staff reports, the data, the engineers, other science facts, findings of fact, everything behind it. So we're looking at that. We're also including, of course, the staff input and recommendations, or the council advisory committee's recommendation. So we're taking all this into consideration along with what's in the best interest of our community that may weigh some bit of a factor for certain types of things, i.e., certain things that might change the nature of our community. And then we're also weighing in public input. But when you're saying, as if we're a court, we're looking at it objectively of, number one, does it, in our view, 5 people, does it meet our code?
Okay, so great questions, okay? So when you're in the quasi-judicial setting, you are taking your city code, that's the law, and you're receiving information through the public hearing process. So through the application, all of this stuff we do to establish the record, the documents, the exhibits, pictures, the drawings, the maps, and the reports, the letters from all of the agencies, all of those things, all of those exhibits, those are all evidence, if you will. The testimony from the public and from the applicant and staff. You take all of that and you apply that to the law, to the code. And then you come out with a decision, which is why for every decision you have written, it's required by statute. I got that to hand out to you too. You have written findings, okay? And you have conclusions of law, have a decision. So you know, what are the facts? So in all of those pieces, so like on the parking requirement, in a planned unit development, the applicant can ask for adjustment of those parking requirements. And so have they met the, you know, they've asked for this adjustment and they've asked for some sort of modification accordingly. But, you know, you can apply the facts to the law. What are the findings? What are your conclusions? What's your decision? So it's just like a judge in the sense that a judge has to say, what's the law? What are the facts? And what's the outcome of the lawsuit? It's called quasi-judicial because the law recognizes that most people in this circumstance are not law trained. And so it's unfair, frankly, to hold non-law trained people to the same standards that we would expect a judge to be held to. And so accordingly, there's some flexibility in it. And we want to elevate folks as much as we can, be careful in the process, and try to maintain the integrity of the process. But in the end of the day, we want it to be as fair as it can be, but we know it's not the same as in a court of law. We don't have objections. We permit hearsay. We don't, you know, get down to the part, you know, just because Grandpa Moses says, well, I can remember when, or so-and-so said this, you know, we don't exclude that testimony. We take it all in, and we take it for what it's worth. Okay.
The summary that you're saying is that in a land use quasi-judicial hearing, you're taking everything in, applying it to law, making decisions in as objective a way as possible.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. And been doing this for a while, and I can tell you that overall, of course, of 4 decades, councils, planning commissions, you know, folks like you try really, really hard to get it right. And it's not perfect, but I can also tell you judges aren't perfect either. And so it's the cleaner we make the process, the better, you know, it's the old garbage in, garbage out thing. The better we make the process, the better the result. So, all right, so I want to try to keep this rolling here.
Thank you.
Um,
I'd like to hit conditional use permits as well.
what's that?
I'd like to hit CUPs as well.
Okay.
Navigate that, but keep going, sorry.
All right, let's see. I want to talk a little bit about, just about when a case, when your decision gets challenged in court, so you have an appreciation of what that looks like. So if a decision that you make gets challenged in court, it's a process called judicial review. And the judge primarily looks at procedure. Was the procedure correct? Were all the notices correct? Was the decision made on the record? Was there, was the counsel, clean in terms of conflicts and those kinds of things? Was the process clean? And so the judges typically are not asked to reconsider all the evidence. They're just asked to look at, was the process clean, and was there evidence to support the decision that was made? So your decision is treated like it's an administrative decision, meaning that there has to be what we call substantial evidence to support the decision. It doesn't mean that the judge goes in and second guesses whether you made the right decision, but whether there was substantial evidence to support the decision and the process was clean. That's essentially what the judge looks at. That's why we emphasize so much all of the process. If there was a mistake in the notice, redo the notice, redo the hearing. There's a requirement for a transcribable record. So if there's some problem and somebody didn't hit record, redo the hearing. We have all of those pieces that we try to make sure are clean so that the process gets done. Okay? So, other questions? Did I cover it okay?
Like a law professor. You questioned us, put us on the spot.
The other one I wanted to go back to is that I mentioned is conditional use permit and the difference between the objective aspect of a quasi-judicial land use hearing, where we're taking all the information like you said and then applying it to the law, which is our code, and saying, does this fit? On conditional use permits, in order for something to receive a conditional use permit, the application has questions that are more of a subjective, perhaps, nature than does it have require 2 parking spaces and are they providing 2 parking spaces? Objective, does the proposal meet with the neighborhood, conform with the neighborhood? Does it affect the neighborhood in an adverse health, safety, or otherwise way? Those sorts of questions, which are much more, there's kind of objective, but there's some data or fact that we can kind of derive, like if you have a certain use in a certain neighborhood, is that going to increase traffic? If, for instance, somebody's applying for a conditional use permit, we'll hit on short-term rentals as an example, for a larger, over 19-person short-term rental, and does it, the conditional use permit requirements, does it meet, is it compatible with the neighborhood? Uses? Is it, the following things? And now we say, well, I think that if there's 19 people staying there, and if it is actually 19, there's probably at least 5 or 6 cars. All those cars coming and going in a neighborhood where there's young children, and narrow streets and snowmobile trailers on the road, and issues with the ambulance being able to get there if there is something with a fire truck, like, well, that seems like it is an adverse effect to that neighborhood. But it feels like we're asked to be making a decision that has some subjectivity to it. So can you give us a little direction there?
Okay, so,
All the questions on a lot of
all right, so that, the conditional use permit or special use permit process that's set out in Idaho code, and your city code matches those kind of criteria, is the state's way and the city's way of trying to find a process for how do we accommodate the square pegs for round holes. And so it does have subjective factors in it. And it does call upon the decision makers to listen to the community, the neighborhood, and the applicant, and to try to strike a balance to see if there are ways that you can balance all of these competing interests, these competing property interests, and come up with some solution. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can't. And sometimes the accommodation is, I guess part of it is on the plus side, it says human beings are infinitely creative. And so don't presume that there is no solution to this dilemma. Which is why in 67, 65, 19, it says that when a governing body denies a permit, one of the things that you have to do when you deny a permit is you have to tell an applicant what, if anything, the applicant could do to get the permit. So when I was the Meridian city attorney back in the early 2000s, there was a Kentucky Fried Chicken spot not too far from the freeway that closed down, and it was in between Meridian Road and the Main Street going in, and it was pretty narrow parcel and a lot of stuff there. And the owner came forward with a proposal for a new fast food restaurant for the drive-through. And it was a nightmare as far as the drive-through and some other uses that were already next to it, and congestion. I mean, you could just see that it just, and council wrestled with this thing. I mean, hours wrestling with this, and they denied it. Said, come back. You know, we'll approve it if you can fix these different issues. And so the applicant came back again and tried it a different way. And they wrestled with it again. And again, they just, went back and forth and back and forth and denied it again and said, you've made a good effort, but it's still, if you can fix this part of it, we can get you the permit. applicant came back a third time. And finally, the council said, you know what? You're never gonna fix this. You've tried 3 times. You've made a best effort at it, but it's just not gonna work. And so that's the only time I've seen an applicant come at it 3 ways and finally give up. But it was one of those situations where the code calls for, tell them what they need to address in order to get the permit. And they tried and tried, and finally the council said, you know what? Can't fix it. You know, there's no drive-through that's ever gonna work on this parcel. So the only way you can ever do this is have a drive-up, sit-down restaurant, period. So yes, the CUP special use permit process has some factors in it, like is it compatible with the neighborhood? How can you make it more compatible? Or is it detrimental to the neighborhood? How do you make it not detrimental? Those kinds of things require a balancing act. But ultimately, if you, when you're processing those applications, you get good information and you ask hard questions. I'll pick on Colby. Colby asks really good questions. He asks hard questions of applicants, and staff, and other people. And that's what you want. You want to ask lots of good questions so that you get all that information out on the table. And maybe the answer is we can't fix it. Questions about where are they going to park those snowmobile trailers? You know, how many folks are going to show up? How many cars? Where are they going to park those cars on these short-term rentals? What is the fire safety plan? What is their noise mitigation? You know, those things are important questions for those neighborhoods. Legislature didn't do us any favors. They passed that bill without really any input from neighborhoods. Okay. Anything else?
So because we have a conditional use permit come through, and in our discussion, we go through it, all that's listed, there's about 15 questions the conditional use permit needs to meet in order to be approved. Say, we don't see how this meets these, you know, many of these factors, and if we deny it, then if the applicant wants to go back and try to, you know, appeal it per se, which is basically taking the city to court, right?
Right.
Then do we have the standing, if having documented these key items, that we say public input, the facts about the neighborhood, et cetera, don't meet this, you know?
That's,
You want to do a commercial project out on the highway, you need to do a traffic study to give the ITD, find out whether or not you have to put in a turn lane, right? So on a parking here, there's no parking on the city streets in the winter.
so Mike, the thing you want to do when you've got that scene and you've got those issues is make sure the record is complete. Make sure you ask those questions. And if you see that the applicant hasn't adequately, in your mind, addressed parking or parking during the winter because they've got snow storage places where it looks like they want to store the snowmobile trailers, then you ask those questions. You know, I'm looking at your map of your parcel, and you know, where are you going to put the snow? We're going to haul the snow off. okay, you're gonna haul the snow off, then that has to be in the conditions of approval. All the snow has to be hauled off. They can't just shove it onto the parking place where the trailer would have been.
We're gonna haul it off so that there are only X number of spaces.
Yeah. So you know, just have to make sure the record is, if they say, well, yeah, I guess we hadn't thought about that, then you can deny it and say they didn't have an adequate snow storage plan. And so that's why the questions that you ask and the answers that are provided become an important part. That's why those written findings and conclusions become so important.
But I also hear that we're encouraged to provide some solutions like we just discussed, using the snow and the parking as an example. Someone came in and said, this is what we're doing. And we asked the questions and didn't get really solid answers, addressing it. If we could either deny it or say, there's these deficiencies, here's some possible solutions that you need to look at and come back to.
Well, you would deny it and say, in order to achieve approval, you'd have to address snow storage in order to maintain the parking spaces through the winter. You don't tell them what the answer is. Say, here's what you'd have to do. You just have to do some sort of, maybe they put in some kind of expensive snow melting thing under the parking spots to where it all melts. Maybe that's their answer. I don't think so, but
yeah, focus on the end result.
yeah. And you don't have to answer their question. You have to tell them what they have to address. What, if anything, to do to obtain the permit? If they don't have a safety plan, in order to get approval, you have to have a safety plan.
But here's the danger I see from a practical standpoint. If we're too vague, and what you and Mike have been talking about is not too vague. If you get too vague and you go, oh, you just got to address parking. And then they come back and you go, oh, you didn't address it right. And I've seen examples where we're just going back and forth and not having good communication at the end. So that's why it's helpful to have some specifics like that you've been talking about.
Again,
Really helpful.
okay, so again, remember, we want our process to be fair, right? And so it's not, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, the worst thing that could be done is for somebody to tell me that what I did wasn't good enough, but not tell me what wasn't good enough.
Right.
And so, if I didn't do something right, tell me what wasn't right about it so that I could fix it, right? But I mean, just don't tell me that wasn't good. So we want to be fair. So we want to give them enough detail. This isn't, the parking, you didn't solve the parking in the wintertime. You got to be able to address this so the parking is maintained through the winter. And so you're right, there has to be enough detail because we want to be fair to everybody. That's the essence of government. We want to be fair across the board. Okay. Well, I failed. I didn't put Colby to sleep.
Got close.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay.
I agree with Mike, that was super helpful.
Very good. Very good discussion. Good questions asked.
Really like, that thought too about the CUPs. That's an area previously for me, what's arbitrary, what is.
Well, and if we get confused, we're not getting all around the circle. kind of figure it out amongst us, right? I guess what I'm getting at is when we go to solve our ballot point to get to the answer. And so, it's real simple here in Fremont Ranch HOA meeting. What's in the best interest of preserving, protecting the assets and taking care of the owners of property within Fremont Ranch? When we have conflict, we go back to that. 5 board members all represent different aspects of Fremont Ranch. And we all come to it with that. So for us, the city council, we have something that's subjective that can be a little more difficult, like in the conditional use permit. What do we go to? Or in a land use application where we might be getting hung up on something. So we need to go back to, hold on a second, all of us, we're all here trying to do the best we can. We know that. We're all trying to represent our community. We're trying to do the best by way of our community and by process. So where do we go? I just heard that there's 2 kind of key items on the couple key items that you just said. So that's what, to me, I want to go back to when we're having a meeting and get stuff. What Phil said, make sure on the conditional use permit or any part of the, or part of the judicial that, the process is clean all the way through. The next one is that you said on the conditional use permit, that, you're taking notes, you're asking questions, you're having it all real clear in that way. Are we getting the information? And then on the land use application, not conditional use permit. Similarly, you said we're taking all the information. Have we taken all the information into consideration and applied it to the law, which is our city code? So you gave us something to kind of simplify it. Because sometimes we get bogged down and we get caught up.
Yeah, and so I would add a third component to that.
Uh-huh.
And the third component is, has it already been determined in Idaho law and court that allocation of interpretation is already been determined on way. For example, for me, I might say, I don't see how any short-term rental of over 30 people in a neighborhood conforms to our definition of doesn't disrupt the neighborhood or safety. That's, so every time there's an application 30 in a predominantly neighborhood thing, I would like to apply the principle. I'm not saying that, but I would apply the principle that does not meet our code. But it might be already tried law, because we know Idaho legislature, somebody says, you won't stand ground on that, and you're setting the city up for suit. So anyway, I think that third thing, the bill's gonna go, that's been.
Well, you got asked last night to apply a special tax for kind of use. And I can tell you there is no such tax available absent a legislative change. So until the legislature is willing to put that kind of tax on the books, it isn't going to happen. Now, you want to try to be the bleeding edge, put something on your books, do that so that you can get sued for doing it? I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I think there's you may feel that way as just the general, starting point. But there's a lot of discretion, especially with these additional use permits in terms of applying all the evidence you're getting from the public of saying, yeah, this is going to create some traffic noise or whatever, to the criteria of the conditional use permit, whether it conforms with the neighborhood character, whether it meets the comprehensive. So, I think there's still ways for you to express those issues in form with the criteria of the conditional use permit without, having this blanket statement of like, well, I have to deny this because it's just, I just don't think it's a process.
Let me do things. For example, that 19th place may be in a commercial zone. Okay, that's a different thing. Yeah, I agree. There's still, but if you're leaning towards one way, it's kind of like Rick Barry's comment, tax them heavily, Bill would say, that is not possible. Same way with using some principle. that you have to deny it. So if that's already been tried in court, if that principle won't stand up, you may have another exception to this. Don't base it on that.
Well, and quite frequently, we will ask Bill, our legal counsel, Mark Peterson, is this even possible? Do we have this question? And we'll try to get at it from that way. And we have really good dialogue on those kinds of things. And where we've gone, if we've gone astray, we're really fortunate that we have that we have legal counsel at our meetings help us. That's really important that you always go through that check.
Well, sometimes you need to be, but sometimes you need help in the legislature and to see the problem and to give you tools. And the problem for a city, if you want to call it a problem, I see it as a problem, is Idaho is what's called a Dillon's Law state, which says that you only have such authority as is granted in the Constitution and the general laws, the statutes of the state. And so, so you have the legislature, which frequently looks to take things away. Paul had a ballot initiative. It said ballot initiative failed, and the legislature promptly had a bill passed and signed into law that took away from local governments the ability to set a local minimum wage. There's a manufacturer of plastic grocery bags in Twin Falls County, and so there is a law in Idaho that prohibits a local jurisdiction in Idaho from prohibiting you can't ban plastic grocery bags. So there are the legislature preempts you rather than, I mean, they take tools out of the toolbox instead of putting them in the toolbox for you on a regular basis.
Well, the other add to that, maybe to Bill's something like this, but Bill, you know, is here to keep us out of trouble. I'm not here to get the city into trouble, maybe, but I guess that, you know, I don't see a problem with reading laws in front of them. I mean, maybe yes, ultimately it has to go to the legislature to change things, but a lot of times, like the short-term rental law, it's always stated as we can't prohibit short-term. And a lot of people, you know, almost read those like you almost can't do anything to them. But there are outs. I mean, it says that, you know, it still preserves the authority of cities to regulate them, not just for safety, but neighborhood character even and that kind of thing. So it's not an all-out prohibition. Now you can, you know, we can have a policy that kind of pushes that, and yes, they may get in trouble, may get sued.
Yeah,
but, you know, but that's, I mean, I see that as decisions that we need to make, and with legal counsel, and, you know, have we gone over the line for sure?
Yeah.
How close to that line are we? You know, that's what we have Bill for, and whether we're willing to that close or not. I might be a little less lawsuits don't scare me. I know that costs the city money, but you know, this isn't. These aren't $1 million. You know, you wrongfully terminated someone. You're gonna have to pay out whatever, you know, their damages are. These are just basically your loss is overturned. Your CUP is remanded back to the council for reconsideration. I mean, they're not big money paying out things.
So again, you're the drivers. you decide what we push and what we don't. But again, lawyers have this unique ability to catastrophize, and I'm one of the best, my wife says. And so, not lawyers, but catastrophizers, that is. Just to let you know, so if there are some things that you decide you want to push on certain things, you can push and see. The thing you don't want to do is, it's the old, you don't want to go hog wild. It's so egregious that then you end up with another bill in the legislature which pushes way over. I keep thinking that we need to have a short-term rental party house next door to every legislator. Causing, wreaking havoc in their neighborhood in order to affect change in that area. So maybe that's the best thing we could do, is buy the house next door to certain legislators and turn it into a party house with raucous and bacchanalian.
So one thing we are interested in, I think, as a council though, is trying to, in about 3 months, we're going to get a report from our consultants about how much money it would cost for deed restrictions, the land bank, or entering into partnerships with private developers to improve our situation with workforce housing, more supply. And I've heard numbers that perhaps that could cost, from staff, when I say I've heard numbers, it might be, it's a sizable number, maybe $2 to $3 million a year. And we still have legal authority to use responsibly local option tax. How we structure that local option tax, whether it's a sales tax or a property tax or some other kind of tax, we're going to need your help to explore that, because we are interested in trying to figure out how to fund these opportunities that appear legal and socially responsible and would help with our housing. And I would suggest that happens at some kind of a work session, so we can focus on that, and all of council and staff can ask you a lot of questions.
Sure.
So when we say that the suggestion last night, I believe it was there it is. Can't do it. That may be our legal position today, but perhaps there's a way of applying a local option tax, putting that out to a vote. For local option tax has to be voted on. And it has very specific things in it. There may be some way of doing something similar, but not just taxing short-term rentals. That's my belief, but we definitely need to have a work session to talk about that and have you present to guide it.
Sure. Yep, no problem. Okay. I've used up my time.
Good.
All right, so we're gonna take a little break so you can get if you need the restroom, eat your lunch. I have it all written down, so in case you forgot what you ordered.
No, it's good, I'll just take that one.
And then Aaron's gonna present while you're having, yeah.
So. And then we'll sort of do a working lunch to stay on time and the guys are on time and after, and it's gonna present via team, but if you're more comfortable eating at the table, you can do that.
All right, Aaron.
Hi, Erin. Can you hear us and see us okay? Good. You're muted.
Since I'm the first person talking today, how's the sound, or should I put in some earphones?
Sounds great. I just want to make sure we put the microphone here so you can hear everybody good.
Yeah, because as it stands, I'm sort of like a voyeur in the room looking at the backs of all your heads. It's a little creepy. Yeah, it's like I'm in a. But that's okay. It's probably better I don't see your faces anyway.
Feelings mutual.
So are we waiting for anybody, or are we all here?
It's here.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so
Hard copies of the draft, so they do have that in their hands.
perfect. I know in all your spare time last night, you probably all got home around 11 and read the entire document. So I'm sure you're up to speed with all that free time you had. But you might remember a few months back, Ms. Thrower, you missed this one, but we talked a little bit about changing the format of the way that we do our annual reports. And so this is our first stab at trying to do something more of a state of the city overview. Hopefully it still contains a lot of the good content that you're used to seeing, but just in a different format. It was built to be an online document. So what you have in front of you isn't my best work. What you have in front of you is sort of a quick draft for you guys to write on, scribble, make notes. Feel free to make comments as we go through it, or save them and let me know your thoughts afterwards. That's fine also. We do have department heads on the line. So as we make it through to each department, and I'm not going to read to you this morning, I'll just hit some highlights of the actual report. And then if you have questions at any point for any of the department heads, they will answer. So I'll just dig right in. So up there on your screen, hopefully you're seeing the McCall reflections. This is normally on the web, it would actually flow to the right, but this is a PDF version. So it starts out with the council with an overview of what the council does. I did highlight our past members from the year. And then onto the right, we have our priorities. So each year, of course, and you guys will be doing that today, you outline priorities for staff to concentrate on. Last year, those were local housing, library expansion, the Highway 55 collaboration, with ITD, and then the business support and retention piece, which was intended to support our local businesses and build our downtown. So there's a contents, a letter from your leaders with an overview of feelings from the previous year. And then we dig right into the council priorities. So this is laid out to give an overview to the public. So again, we're sort of shifting gears a little bit. We're trying to make a little bit more of a palatable experience for the citizens to sort of see what you've accomplished as a council and what we've accomplished as a staff. So each of those 5 priorities is outlined on these pages with action items that you took based on your focus. So as an example, local housing was to create tools that produce a variety of for sale rental units with various price points as needed. And so we lay out a couple of things we've done, like the local housing action plan, the structured donation piece, etc. And then of course we outlined some challenges. So each of these projects has a little different layout depending on what its purpose was. So I'll let you lead through those. Tried to add a little bit of interest there with some photos, and all of these online will have linkable, clickable links so that I can lead people to what is this local housing authority? I want to learn more about it. Or what is this McCall, master plan? I want to read it. So hopefully the online tool will give our public some more engagement opportunities to learn more and dig in more than what they would normally get from an annual report. So next is the Leading Together, which just highlights our boards and commissions. I did a little shout out for Mr. Faraday down there at the bottom, who is a big piece of our MRA in his retirement this year. And then accolades. So accolades are anywhere we've been recognized either individually as staff or as a city, and in some cases, even our consultants, engineers. So that's accolades. Our partnerships. These might be groups that we work with as a staff or groups that you serve on as city council. And then we've highlighted our grant numbers there for you on page 13. So those are all the grants. I think it's, well, we have a total number for you on the community economic development page. But as you can see, a ton of grants came in thanks to Ms. Delta James. We did a health and safety piece as our response to COVID. Just a necessary animal in today's society. What are we doing in response to the global pandemic? And then I did a highlight on public art. Specifically, it's become a hot topic in the last few years, a little controversial. Yes, Linda would like me to point out that those grants do not include the FAA grant, and that FAA grant is outlined on the airport page. So the public art piece highlights the ones that were installed this year. Of course, you have your bus stop art that was done by the children, the mill whistle piece, which I think a lot of you were involved in, and then our confluence, which is on the downtown 2nd Street art that was done by local Laidlaws. Public safety. So this is our police department outlook. We did a couple of different things here. We highlighted the new recruitment piece, of course, calls for service and whatnot as usual. We even outlined the new Spillman software. And this would be the moment if you have a question for the chief about any accomplishments or questions about this year, we would invite him on to answer any of those questions. And if none, he can click right out of here.
Woo! Thanks, Erin. Looks fantastic, by the way.
Thank you. If no questions for the chief, we'll move on. So governance. So what I wanted to do here was really highlight all the ordinances that you've passed. Bessie Jo keeps a great record, of course, of everything we have going on. My dream would be that eventually all of these would link out to our Laserfish portal so that they could read each of those ordinances. And so that's definitely something possible for us to accomplish. And then we'll be returning back to page 19 later on in the meeting today when you outline what those priorities are for 22. I just thought it would be nice to include those. And we might still move around the order and finalize that down the road. Again, this is a working draft document, so I encourage your comments after. Next, we have City Clerk. Bessie Jo is right there with you in the room if you have any questions. The biggest thing to note, I think, on our clerk's report this year is a series of amazing process improvements all along the right-hand side there. They have done a ton of work in the clerk's office to not only streamline and digitize processes for our citizens, but also to do verifying and checking across all of their agendas and files and you name it. So Bessie Jo, if they have any questions, you can wave your hands around if they forgot where you are. No questions for Bessie Jo. Okay. So next, I did a highlight on local option tax, reminding you that this is tourism local option tax. This is what's run through the clerk's office. Amanda Payne is your administrator there. So on the left-hand side, we talk a little bit about local option tax, the ordinance itself, and what amounts we used for in different categories. For example, the local housing program, $100,000. You can see that on that page 22. And then on the right-hand side, we did groups funded. So we highlighted any of the groups or organizations that received monies in 2021 from local option tax. And then finance and utility billing. So on the online, this would have a direct link to our budget page on our website where we have all of Linda's budget documents, etc. But she also had a ton of accomplishments this year, in particular with electronic invoicing, record retention, utility billing, just in general, making life a little bit easier for citizens, being able to pay online with express bill pay. Now it's not just utility billing, but also other invoices. So Linda is also on the line if you have any questions about finance or utility billing. Awesome. So we did human resources and communications. As you know, human resources and communications are a part of the city manager department. So we work directly for Annette and basically do her bidding day to day as she wishes. Human resources, of course, does all your hiring and it tracks all types of internal documents. I think Tracy's on today as well, if you have any questions. And then for my piece on the right, I just outlined ways to get involved, to stay involved. And of course, again, these will be clickable links for the online document. Any questions for Tracy or myself? Remember, staff's always available to you. So if you have any questions after this morning's meeting, feel free to reach out to them and ask them. Parks and Recreation. Parks on the left, recreation on the right. My perfection eye already sees some errors here on this page as far as the way it looks, but the content's good. So the Parks and Recreation team, gee whiz, it is hard to fit them on just 2 pages. They do a lot of good stuff. And you guys all know that. So again, the goal is to sort of link out to any of those programs. I think the biggest note is the fact that we had over 800 and I think 55, that says, I should put my glasses on, for registered participants in our Parks and Rec programming, and then over 2,000 that participated in other events and tournaments. So we're touching a lot of human beings through our Parks and Rec department. Of course, we handle quite a bit of open space and acres of parkland, and all of that's outlined for you in the stats. Kurt is also on the line today if you have any questions or comments for Parks or Rec. He's waving.
Lots of compliments.
I didn't hear what you said.
Lots of compliments for Kurt
Yes.
and everybody. Amazing.
Okay, it looks like you're off the hook, Kurt.
Kurt did make the parks crew is downtown now blowing a small whistle on the steam boiler for the mill whistle.
Is the mill whistle going tonight?
I think it's gonna blow tomorrow. Kurt,
When's the mill whistle going?
We're not able to blow the big whistle this year just because of where construction was at in the fall. Plowing that site was really not possible this year. So we'll button it up this year, and next year I think we'll be able to incorporate it into Winter Carnival. So the crew's got the trailer downtown with signage about the whistle, and they've got the small whistles that were inside the mill that kind of represented shift changes and all that. So they're plenty loud. I can hear them from inside the office just fine.
Nice.
Yeah, we had a pretty snazzy banner that we created for the parade that didn't happen, but it'll be displayed down by the whistle. And it's kind of neat. It shows an image from the 70s of the mill whistle compared to today. So we encourage you to check that out. Any other questions for Kurt, Council? Okay, we'll move on. Thanks, Kurt. So economic development, there's a lot of moving pieces to that. Unfortunately, Michelle, well, good for Michelle. I think she's out of the office for pleasure, but Annette is here to answer any questions you might have about her department. Of course, the most important thing with community economic development is all the different pieces that throws in. So we have the building department, planning department, economic development, which is that grant, our business outreach, and of course, GIS. Which is all of our geographical information systems mapping that is available. It's highly used by the community for multiple reasons. Ton of accomplishments for community and economic development, in particular the closeout of the MRA this year, the starting of the local housing action plan, the public art master plan, just assisting in the Valley County waterways management plan. I mean, obviously they're just covering a lot of ground in community and economic development. So if you have any questions about any of those topics or highlighted information, I would reach out to Michelle when she returns next week. Any questions for Annette before I move on about this department? Next would be Public Works. Nathan is also unavailable, but Annette is here to answer any questions about Public Works. So this is another department that has a lot of moving pieces. Of course, they've made up of 3 different departments. Engineering, you can see our staff engineer Morgan there, the streets department, as well as water. And so I've taken an opportunity to highlight each one of those individually, which is something a little bit more in depth than we normally do in our past department reports. So here you've got all types of information about streets, stats, number of, inches plowed, the permits issued, the number of staff we have, of course, all the different accomplishments like the Crabs project, our hiring of new street operators, HVAC replacement, etc. A lot being done in the streets department, and of course, Superintendent Chris Malvich is highlighted there for you. Any questions about streets specifically before I move on to water? So water department, that's Sabrina Sims there. She's your water manager. And of course, Levi Brinkley and Stacy LaFay are a huge piece. I had the opportunity to get a lot of new photos of a couple of different departments this year, and Public Works was one of them. So Stacy's pictured there in our new intake facility, which was one of their accomplishments from this year. Of course, a big long list for them as well. And we also have their water customers, water main lines that were replaced, the hours, flushing hydrants. Probably the biggest challenge outlined by the water department was usage, which I know you're all aware of from the summer. So if you have any questions about water, Annette is there. So library. Unfortunately, Meg is also unavailable today. We apologize. But the library here has amazing accomplishments along the right. Of course, the biggest one being the fact that we passed the bond this year with a 78% favor with the new and improved bond package that council worked so hard through at the beginning of 2021. Meg does a great job highlighting the visitors to the library, the number of programs, and that number at the bottom, member amount saved, is the number, is the amount of money that someone would have paid for the books that they were able to get as a loan at the library. Any questions about the library?